Now let's export our BSP brushes to be used as a template for modeling. We could go through and select each individual brush one by one. If you left click, hold down Control, then left click to add to selection, but this would take too long. There is a faster way. If you go to World Outliner, select the very top brush, and then if you hold down Shift and left click on the brush down the list, it will select everything in between. So let's scroll all the way down, hold Shift, and left click on the last box brush. We also need to add our stairs, so let's scroll down, hold down Control, not Shift, but Control, and then left click on Linear Stair Brush, on the first one and the second one. This will add to a selection without adding everything in between. Now with all BSP brushes selected, press Ctrl G to group all the brushes so we can select them as one. Ctrl G is the hotkey, but if you go to orthographic viewport, which is easier to right click without deselecting, and with all the brushes selected, right click, go to group, and here you can ungroup, Shift G, or you can right click and group your brushes, but instead I use the hotkey Ctrl G. If we go ahead and export this right now, the pivot point of this object will be moved to world origin, to the 000 space. Let me move these actors away and temporarily delete the floor. Right here, this red line and this green line, their intersection is the world origin. So the pivot point will be automatically placed at the world origin when the BSP brushes are exported, while the object will remain in the exact same position. So when it comes to this building, we want to place it at the world origin. So when it's imported into Maya LT, the building is not somewhere off in space. It doesn't have to be precise. So we're going to use the grouped object pivot point, which is at the center of this building. Then in top orthographic view, move the building so its pivot point is at the world origin. We still want to make sure that the building is on the ground plane. And upon export, this pivot point will be moved down to the world origin, which is at the bottom of the building. This will make more sense when we import this into Maya LT. Now let's go to File, Export Selected, and save as type. Make sure it's set to FBX. Let's export this into our Maya LT project directory. So we're going to navigate to Maya LT, Miami Corner Store, and create a new folder, export it from UE4. And inside this folder, we're going to save this as Miami Corner Store 01 BSP, which is our map name. And this name is fine. When FBX export options come up, we're going to keep FBX export compatibility to 2013, but you can choose any other year that's available here. And everything else we're going to disable. So disable vertex color, level of detail, collision, welded vertices, and click export. All we need are these brushes, and we don't need anything else. Most of these options is when you are exporting static meshes. There is one more option that you could use, and that is export all. This will export everything in your scene, every single object. Although this might be useful in some cases, but for us, all we need are just these BSP brushes. If you need to export your BSP brushes as OBJ instead of FBX, you will have to convert all these brushes to a static mesh first, as brushes are not supported to be exported as OBJ, only as FBX. So let me show you just in case you wanted to export as OBJ. I'm going to move these brushes back. So I'm going to Ctrl Z until we have our building back to where it was. And with everything still grouped, I'm going to duplicate it. Because once we convert these brushes to a static mesh, they will be replaced with the static mesh. So with the building duplicated, let's move it to world origin just as we did with our BSP brushes. Select the duplicated brushes, and inside the details panel, go to brush settings and choose create static mesh. We have to define where we want to store the static mesh. So we're going to store it inside our WOLD corner store directory. So select it, and inside this folder we're going to create a new folder called static meshes. Right click in the empty space and select new folder. Name it static meshes. This folder will also contain all of our future static meshes that we import. For static mesh name, I'm going to use BSP SM_template. Actually, I'm going to change it to SM for static mesh underscore BSP template, because all of our static mesh names will have a prefix of SM underscore. Make sure the static meshes folder is selected and then click on create static mesh. Now our BSP brushes have been converted to a static mesh. And if we go to content browser, inside the static meshes folder, here's our static mesh. Now I wouldn't use this static mesh other than a placeholder. It's not usable for final in-game because it's not optimized and it doesn't have sufficient detail as you could achieve inside the 3D modeling software. But because we have the static mesh, we can now export it as an OBJ if you needed to. Or you could also export it as an FBX. There are two ways you can export a static mesh out of Unreal Engine 4. First is to go inside Content Browser, right click on the static mesh, choose Asset Actions, and Export. This will bring up Export dialog box, change Save As Type to OBJ or FBX, and save. Or you can do it just as we did with our BSP brushes. If the static mesh is inside your level, select it, go to File, Export Selected, change Save As Type. In our case, we want OBJ. Select where you want to export to. We're going to keep the same Maya LT directory and export it from UE4 folder and click Save. When the message pops up asking if we want to export the materials as images, choose No. All we need is geometry, and we don't need the textures that are on the static mesh. Whichever option you use to export, whether it's using BSP brushes and exporting as FBX, or converting your BSP brushes to a static mesh and then exporting that static mesh as an FBX or an OBJ, doesn't matter. The final result we are after is having this geometry that we can import into Maya LT to be used as a template to model to. Our last step is we want to save. Go to File and Save All.